Senator, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Senators. This bill, in many ways, is a very much a companion bill to the last one. These two bills together seek to provide about $600 million additional for transit funding every year, so a lot of the core reasons for the need are here, and I'll talk a little bit about them from my perspective. Obviously, these are marrying two different funding sources, and that we can talk about as well. But I really do appreciate, I want to say myself, as someone who comes from an incredibly congested part of the state where I've seen congestion really start to eat away at the economic vitality of my area, the quality of life in our area. I just really appreciate the willingness and the openness and the interest of the members of this committee to put transit into the conversation when we're discussing the importance of transportation infrastructural improvements. So I also want to just thank the committee staff for working with my office on this measure. I am pleased to accept the amendments that have been recommended in the analysis. So as we know, in calling the first special session, the governor stated that maintaining infrastructure is a critical function of state government and vital to California's continued economic growth. He called on the legislature to put forward and adopt a plan that provides funding to maintain and repair the state's transportation and other critical infrastructure. Now, public transportation, as we've discussed, must be a part of the overall strategy for addressing the state's transportation and infrastructure needs. In dense urban areas like LA or the San Francisco Bay Area, simply building new lanes and roads or fixing existing ones will not alleviate congestion, nor will it address the needs of millions of Californians who use our buses, trains, and other mass transit options. It will also not provide alternative transportation options for Californians who might choose to take public transit if it were a viable option for them. Public transit serves as an affordable alternative to automobile travel for millions of Californians. It's a release valve for soul-crushing traffic congestion on our freeways. For some, it's the only option to get to work, to school, to daycare, and to access important social services. Where it works, transit is a welcome and vital option for Californians at all income levels. In fact, we should mention that public transit operators provided 1.44 billion passenger trips in 2013. One of the things I love about going to places like New York, it's such a democratizing thing. You see students sitting next to custodians, sitting next to to Wall Street bankers who are being paid $1 million a year, all together on the subway. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing.
It's a trade every day.
So, and yet, as critical as the system is, as we discussed, the system currently faces a backlog of $39 billion in repair needs and a $70 billion shortfall in both operating and capital funding over the next 10 years. So a more expansive, reliable system, I think, could attract riders looking to get away from the stress of traffic delays and aggravation. If we're serious about funding transportation and addressing the repair needs plaguing our network, we must include public transportation into this discussion. So what does this particular bill do? Well, it's a simple approach that seeks to increase funding for the state's local transit agencies by raising the current incremental sales tax rate on diesel fuel. And this will raise nearly $300 million to help these local agencies address unmet capital maintenance and expansion needs. So the incremental sales tax rate was established as part of the 2011 gas tax swap, but the revenue from this source has fallen below the 2011 projections by almost $50 million this fiscal year. So if we hope to achieve the goals that the governor outlined when he called this special session, not to mention the state's environmental and public health goals, including the goals that have been pursued by this Senate with SB 332 and 350, we really do need a multimodal approach that funds transit and highways, as well as bikes and pedestrian improvements and rideshare incentives like more carpool lanes. So this doesn't pit public transit against highways. It instead ensures that we are addressing all the state's transportation needs with a defined revenue source, and I ask for your aye vote. We have several witnesses here in support of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Witnesses, please.
Mr. Chair, members, again, Josh Shaw, California Transit Association. I want to thank the comments that the chair made on the previous bill relative to the merits of investing in public transit. Thanks, Senator Allen. The figure that Senator Allen referenced comes from that CH2M Hill study of transit assets. Yeah. And in fact, you're talking about a need figure in the billions of dollars over 10 years. This doesn't get there, but it starts to take a bite out of that apple. In terms of the fix-it-first emphasis of the special session with the amendments that the senator just took, you're talking about directing these funds only to the rehabilitation, construction, modernization of transit facilities and vehicles. We were so pleased this morning to see our brothers and sisters in labor who work on these jobs, the operating engineers, the carpenters, laborers, the Building Construction Trades Council come out in support of these bills. Perhaps a bit defensively relative to the funding source, the sales tax on diesel fuel, I can imagine some of the questions. As the senator noted, the gas tax swap of 2010 eliminated several sources of then extant funding, decade over decade sources of funding. Those went away. So we could have, were those still there, suggested that you consider sort of moderate increases in a variety of sources to get to increased transit funding, like the chairman's bill does for the highway and streets and roads side. Did we pick the sales tax on diesel fuel as the most logical way to fund public transit in California for decades? We did not, but that is what the state transit assistance program is left with. And so a reasonable increase back up to where we were projected to be during the swap, if not a little bit more to cover that gap, makes sense to us. Relative to the impact on our economy, I can imagine the questions. I would remind folks that a recent study showed that 6 of this nation's 10 most congested road corridors are in the Los Angeles, Orange County region. That region also has the nation's 2nd worst overall gridlock in the nation, with the San Francisco Bay Area 3rd worst, San Jose 5th worst, the Riverside, San Bernardino, Inland Empire area at number 10 in terms of the nation. In 2011, public transit use saved 865 million hours in travel time. Those are folks not stuck in that gridlock. I already referenced the savings in gasoline. Without this public transit use nationally, and we're the 2nd most heavily transit-dependent state in the nation, without the transit use, congestion would have cost our economy an additional $21 billion across the country. We have a huge portion of that here in California. So we're going to suggest to you that this tax source, which we should be concerned about who pays, it's going to benefit, for instance, the expenditures of this tax source by relieving congestion will benefit the truckers who are otherwise stuck in traffic. They should expect their efficiency to increase, the cost of goods movements to go down, thus strengthening our economy while providing more mobility options for transit users or those that want to get out of their car. I do want to acknowledge Mr. Chairman's bill has an excise tax increase on this exact same source. We're asking folks to consider a sales tax on top of that. We understand that decisions have to be made, priorities need to be discussed. We, again, hope you will consider this bill as representing the fact that you all and leadership in both houses and the governor should engage on what is the best way to fund public transportation, whether from cap and trade, sales tax on diesel. Are there other sources that we could be talking to you about? This one reflects a current program. Is there some other way to do it better? I'll close by noting of the $5, $6, $7 billion that many from both parties have talked about in terms of the needs for highways and streets and roads. As Senator Allen pointed out, the 2 bills you've just heard would generate $600 million for transit, about 10% of what's being talked about for the other modes. We would urge your support.
Good afternoon, Justin Fansel again on behalf of MTC. Also here, Mr. Smith asked me to relay that the State Building and Construction Trades Council is in support of the bills, along with our California State Association of Electrical Workers. And point out, Mr. Chair, you mentioned previously about housing and where the jobs are. I think for our members, especially in the Bay Area, we're often seeing that those jobs are taking place far, far away from home. Our options for getting to and from the work, there may be 30 cranes up in the air in San Francisco right now, but the members of that we represent, very few of them live inside the city. The cost of living in that city is very high. So our options are limited. Utilizing transit for us is a very important thing. And we also believe in the fix it first model. We want our streets and roads fixed as well. But when we look at what transportation in the 21st century looks like, we think the funding source and the funding that comes out of this capital needs to also represent transportation in the 21st century. That includes public transit. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, again, Tim Schott on behalf of the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District. The BART Board has not taken a position yet on the good senator's bill. However, they are in support of exploring additional funding mechanisms for transit, and we appreciate the good senator's introduction of this bill and appreciate your consideration of transit in the special session.
Thank you.
Good evening, Steve Wallach again on behalf of the Alameda County Transportation Commission, the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District, Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, and the California Association for Coordinated Transit, also in support of this bill as well, and urge your support.
Thank
Mr. Chairman and members, Andrew Antwi here again on behalf of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. I won't repeat the remarks I made earlier, just to say that LA Metro just recently celebrated its 25th year anniversary of the rail system in Los Angeles. And so the amendments take the bill in the direction of focusing on deferred maintenance needs in the transit world. We think that's appropriate. It's a good investment. We ask that as you consider the larger conversations that are going on about trying to strike a deal for transportation funding, that of course you got to look at what is necessary to get a 2/3 vote, but you also got to look at what's necessary to fund the needs that are in your district. To fund the needs that are in your district, in addition to what's necessary to get a 2/3 vote.
Okay, Andrew.
Mr. Chair and members, Michael Pimentel here on behalf of Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit District, Solano County Transit, in the City and County of San Francisco. Mayor Ed Lee, all in strong support. Thank you.
Kyle Jones with Sierra Club California in support.
Jennifer Whiting with the League of California Cities in support.
Tim Egan with Foothill Transit in support.
Matt Robinson on behalf of the San Mateo County Transit District, as well as Caltrain. A lot of good reasons to support this. I will point out that we've been operating for 150 years, so we've got some really old infrastructure running under our tracks. Thank you.
Joshua Stark with Transform in support, and also to represent a little bit the community of transit riders who are transit dependent. There are millions of Californians who absolutely rely on transit to get to work, to get to schools, to get to hospitals, to go shopping. To leave transit out of the conversation for the entire special session on transportation infrastructure would do a great disservice to this community. We're in strong support. Thank you.
And this is Chanel Fletcher with Safe Routes to School National Partnership, and we're really coming at it from the point of view of children. And so right now we're facing severe cuts to school busing, and so we see more and more children taking transit. And that's why we are in support of this bill, because we believe that children need to get to school. I think in addition to transit, we're also in support of walking and bicycling. Kids are walking and biking to school, and they need to get there safely. And so we are really in support as we think about this revenue, as we think about these funds, making sure that we have revenue for complete streets so that kids can get to school safely. Thank you.
Amanda Egan, Natural Resources Defense Council. Around the state, regions have adopted sustainable community strategies plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that include, I think, hundreds of billions of dollars in transit investments assumed. Some of that money is there, some of that money we need new revenue sources for. So we appreciate Senator Allen's leadership to ensure a new source of transit funding to implement those plans to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions our state is counting on. Thank you.
Jeannie Wardwaller, California Bicycle Coalition in support. Thank you.
Zachary Millay, BART Board of Directors, again wanting to support this complementary bill to the assembly bills that are similar. I'll be somewhat blunt here. So earlier, I think Senator Huff argued that the beneficiary should pay proportionally, and I fundamentally agree with that idea, but we're far from that reality. All transportation in California is subsidized, but roads are disproportionately subsidized. Only about 39% of roadway maintenance is funded by the road users. The people who fund that are people who walk, bike, or use transit, primarily in urban environments, as a primary means of travel. The BART experience, more than 3/4 of our operating expenses is funded by our users through fare box recovery ratio. But we have a state of disrepair, and closing bluntly, I feel that our riders and constituents, they warrant a refund for the subsidies that they've given to roads. And I feel that this bill is a proper way of doing it. It appropriately charges the heaviest subsidized users of roads, diesel users.
Thank you for your service on the BART board, and as a former intern in my office also.
I love it.
When he was 18 years old. Wow. Let's have a discussion. Senator Hertzberg and Senator Wachowski.
Senator Allen, I want to ask you the tough question, because it's easy to get everybody up here and says, you know, give us the money, right? Great, let's charge somebody else. That's what we always see, and we'll take the money, and you marry that with the public policy that says there's a need. There was an insinuation somewhat in terms of the testimony earlier that, you know, by having this money, you'll have better roads, you'll have people get better mileage and this stuff, going from 9.25% to 12.75% in the taxes. And of course, you've got to add Senator Bell's tax on there. The question is, has there been an economic study? Because we know that when prices go up, people are going to find other ways to either pass it on to somebody, to reduce the number of trips. You know, it's like the cigarette tax, where you say, well, you're going to make the tax go so much higher. I'm not advocating. I'm saying I want to ask you the tough questions that you're going to increase the tax, but then you're going to decrease the number of people smoking and you're not going to get any more money. Have you done any kind of economic analysis or read any economic analysis that looks at these numbers to determine whether or not this increase in diesel fuel tax, or, you know, will you in fact do what we do with the Kyle Morris program to end up resulting in incentivizing people because their costs are going up to move to other systems so you don't get the tax? I mean, have you really dug into this beyond just the framework of saying, let's have this as a discussion?
Senator, through the author, California Transit Association has not studied the long-term or short-term economic impact question that you asked. We would rely on historical data that shows that when you invest higher in public transit, people do use it in incrementally greater proportions. Thus, we made our statement about congestion relief. We would also note there are related, probably secondary to your question, but related economic benefits. The personal household expenditure for so many households who aren't probably like mine or yours are vastly proportionally dedicated to personal transportation. With better, cheaper transit options, those households' personal economies are going to benefit. That has a salubrious effect on the overall economic strength of California that you're concerned with. And then I would note the investments, particularly given the amendments that the senator took, in the construction, rehabilitation, modernization of these capital facilities. National economic studies show that every $10 million in capital investment in public transit yields $30 million in increased business sales. You see that figure play out as well as producing jobs on these transit projects.
Do you be willing to take an amendment? I'm not suggesting now, but I want to exercise these ideas. This is the legislature. We're supposed to ask ourselves the tough questions. Senator Hannah Beth Jackson always asks, and Senator Lara just started an investigation dealing with this notion of tax credits. And if you claim you're going to bring these jobs in and we're going to give you a tax credit, shouldn't you be held accountable? Yeah. Shouldn't the system be held accountable the same way? If you're saying that we're going to build on speculation, that maybe you build a mechanization to pay it back or to do something. I mean, in other words, we've got to just, I don't know the answer to that question, but we have to figure out ways to ask ourselves the tough questions and invent policy that has the appropriate glide paths, that has the appropriate escalators, that has the appropriate accountability built into it. I know this is the earlier stages, but I just want to throw this into the marketplace of ideas, if we can, to begin to ask those tough questions, because we need to hold ourselves accountable.
I absolutely appreciate that, Senator. I mean, I guess a couple of things I would say. First of all, the State Transit Assistance Program, which is what would receive the money under this bill, has pretty strong accountability mechanisms, but that would certainly be the work of our committee and the Transportation Committee to, you know, if you feel as though they're inadequate, you know, let's have that conversation and talk about them. Certainly, everything that has been built so far, particularly, and you know this well yourself, being from Los Angeles, the ridership has absolutely exceeded expectations. I mean, if you look at the numbers for the blue line, the red line, the orange line, the gold line, the silver line, they've knocked it out of the park. And so, if anything, I think everything's been exceeding expectations. And you know, I think ultimately what we keep hearing, if you look at the folks who are engaged in freight movement, they are paid by the mile and not by the hour. And one of the big problems they have is moving things in and out of Los Angeles and the Bay Area, partly because of how bad the traffic is. They're then, of course, trying to ship all of their items across the country, and they're bogged down by the terrible traffic. And so we've got to get people off of the roads who can be riding trains to get to and from work, so that we can allow our freeways to be focused on those people who don't have transit as a viable option.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? But maybe, again, maybe probing and investigating is the notion around dedicated truck lanes. If I'm a trucker and I'm dealing, quite frankly, one of the greatest industry growth for jobs in Southern California is goods movement. You can't export goods movement. It's all local high-paid jobs. So is that the highest and best use? I mean, look, I'm all for transit. I'm not suggesting, and I agree with you what you said. I just want to ask the hard questions. What if we said, let's have a dedicated truck lane, and go to the people in this field and said, you know what, we're going to securitize this extra revenue for your diesel fuel. so that we can have a dedicated truck lane. We get them off the freeways. People are scared to death of going against these trucks. Trucks can actually move the goods in a way that needs to happen. And the real issue, in addition to GHGs for truckers, is time. If I can do 3 loads a day instead of 2 loads a day, because I'm not sitting at 2-mile-an-hour traffic, let alone the GHGs, because we know what that is. I'm not suggesting, I just want to put some ideas in your very brilliant head to think through alternatives and ideas and push the envelope.
Yeah, great. And the dedicated truck lanes, that sounds like a good bill, a good discussion.
It's part of our bill.
For us to have. Okay, there you go.
It's part of my bill.
So it's part of the chairman's bill.
Yeah, $300 million a year.
There we go. See? Ask and you will receive.
Goods movement, right, Tony? There, the port access.
Senator, did you?
Let me take slightly a different angle. I'm not a believer in Ronald Reagan's user fees. I actually philosophically don't believe that the guy sitting on the bus should be paying the actual cost to move the bus. I think society has a responsibility for people who that need to move in public assistance, needs to subsidize it. I think we did a great disservice to this country 30 some odd years ago when we invented this user fee and actually wants this person to pay for the actual cost of getting on the bus, because it does the truckers and all of us a service. When more people are on the bus or on the BART system or Metro, it frees it up. So with
especially when we're not charging a user fee for the roads.
Correct. Now, I think is the current 1.5% on the diesel fuel sales tax, does that generate about $150 million a year? Because the staff will press the question.
Yeah.
Am I right on that?
Senator, through the chair, the incremental rate created by the gas tax swap of 2010, which was approved with a 2/3 vote in 2011, the increase in sales tax on diesel fuel, generates about 150, that increment. There's an underlying amount that funds most of the state transit assistance. This would triple that upper level.
Okay, so this bill would increase that by about $300 million a year for $450 million a year. That's right. We agree with that?
Yes. That's about right.
That's about right. Mr. Hill's bill indicates that is it TIRCP? And the LCTOP would result in combined about $300 million a year. So I got $300 million in that bill, and about an extra, actually $450 million here. So over a 10-year period, we're going to get $3 billion from Mr. Hill's legislation and $4.5 billion from yours, which comes up to $7.5 billion over 10 years. The staff report indicates that transit needs are $70 billion.
That's right.
So we're about 11% of what the need is.
That's right.
And I'm concerned that we feel good that we're taking action here on this, and tripling the diesel fuel tax is big, but it really is not answering the question to provide for the infrastructure needs in transit. It's a step in 10 years.
It's nowhere near as enough.
So can I have your, what's
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the part of what we're trying to do here, though, is make sure that transit's part of this conversation as part of this special session. We're trying to come up with something that will make things a little bit better. But there's no question in my mind that that we need to be really bold in this area, and this is what we were able to come up with now that we felt we could generate support. But I couldn't agree with you more, Senator.
Okay. Other questions from other senators? Do you want to close, Senator?
Well, I just really appreciate the support of the chair. I appreciate the support of all the folks who came up to speak. I think this is ultimately nowhere near as far as we need to go in this area. But I ask for your aye vote because I think that this is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle that we have been brought together to discuss in this special session.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion on this bill. Motion. Okay, we move approval with the amendments.
With the amendments, yeah.
Because the amendments actually address Senator Hertzberg's issue, and Senator, if you would work with us on refining those amendments, that would help. because we did put the metrics amendment in there, that they require metrics. Okay, please call the roll, please.
The motion is due pass as amended and refer to the Committee on Appropriations. Bell?
Aye.
Bell, I. Cannella. Allen?
Aye.
Allen, I. Bates? Bates, no. Berryhill? Gaines? Gaines, no. Hertzberg?
Aye.
Hertzberg, I. Leyva? Leyva, I. Liu? Liu, I. McGuire? McGuire, I. Mendoza? Mendoza, I. Pavley? Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, I.
We have 8 votes in favor, 2 opposed. We'll leave it on call for other members to vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators. Thank you.
Okay. We would like to see members return. Here's one.
Sorry, he's coming back. We're trying to call his office, but there's no answer.
Berryhill left. Okay, okay. Let's lift a call and on the bills.
File item 2, SBX 16 by Senator Runner. The motion is due pass and refer to the Committee on Appropriations.
Which one?
File item 2?
The motion was due.
Due pass and refer to the Committee on Appropriations.
got it.
The current vote is 2-8, Chair voting no, Vice Chair not voting. Senators Cannella, Berryhill, Mendoza. Mendoza, no. So that's out 2-9. 2-9, I mean, it fails.
That motion, that vote fails on a 2-9 vote.
File item 4, SBX 18 by Senator Hill. The motion is due pass and refer to the Committee on Appropriations. The current vote is 8-0, Chair voting aye, Vice Chair hasn't voted. Cannella, Bates, Berryhill, Gaines, Pavley. File item 4?
4.
No, not voting. Okay, so that's out 8-0.
That is out on an 8-0 vote.
File item 3, SBX 17 by Senator Allen. The motion is due pass as amended and refer to the Committee on Appropriations. The current vote is 8-2, Chair voting aye, Vice Chair hasn't voted. Senators Cannella, Berryhill, Pavley. Pavley, aye. So that's out 9-2.
That vote is 9-2. That bill is out. We are adjourned of the Senate Select Committee, or Transportation Infrastructure Development Committee.